I remember the way the bank manager looked at me. A stillness came over his face, the kind reserved for hospital rooms and courtrooms, places where truth arrives wearing iron shoes. He slid a stack of withdrawal slips across the desk, each enclosed in a clear plastic sleeve. The room seemed to shrink around me, the way a theater does when the house lights dim. "Mrs. Fairchild," he said, "are you absolutely certain these signatures are not yours?" I didn't even need to touch them. I recognized the loops immediately. My signature has always leaned to the right, a habit from when I used to correct my students' assignments long into the night. But these signatures leaned left, thin and frantic, almost like they were running from something. "I didn't sign those," I whispered. The bank manager nodded once, slow and heavy, as if bracing for the weight of my next question. I could feel my pulse in my throat, the air vibrating with a terrible understanding I wasn't ready to accept. He flipped the top slip over, then tapped his pen on the section labeled authorized by. There it was. A name. A name I knew as well as my own. My cousin. Daniel. My cousin who had insisted, pushed, really, that he help me manage the settlement from the accident. My cousin who had cried when I won the case, telling me that justice had finally smiled on someone in our fractured family. My cousin who had hugged me so tightly my ribs clicked. And now here it was, his signature on withdrawal after withdrawal, tens of thousands of dollars siphoned from the account I had trusted him to guide me through. A warmth rose through me that wasn't anger, not yet. It was disbelief trying desperately to stay alive. "Mrs. Fairchild," the manager continued carefully, "these withdrawals total just over $83,000. The number struck me like cold water. My hands went numb. I thought of the settlement statement I had tucked away in my kitchen drawer, the one I had barely glanced at because Daniel kept telling me he had everything handled. He said that after the accident, after the surgeries, after the endless therapy sessions, I deserved to rest. He had offered to shoulder the stress because, as he put it, I had already carried too much. I believed him. But as the manager placed the stack of forged slips back inside the folder, I felt a shift inside me, a quiet, seismic thing. Something that had been dormant since my husband died 8 years ago, when I was forced to learn the hard lessons of survival. The manager folded his hands and said, "We will need to begin a formal fraud investigation." The word fraud struck a match against the dry tinder of my shock. Fraud. Committed by family. Committed by Daniel. I stared at that folder, its edges neat and unassuming, yet holding the wreckage of trust one hadn't even known I still possessed. And in that moment, an unexpected calm settled over me. A clarity sharper than grief, colder than anger. If Daniel thought he had stolen from a woman too broken to fight, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. My name is Eleanor Fairchild, and I am 62 years old. I say my age with pride, not resignation. Each year has carved its lessons into me with deliberate hands. Some lines came from laughter, some from sorrow, and a few, those deeper ones, came from learning when to speak and when to leave silence hanging in the air long enough for the truth to surface on its own. I spent 38 years as an English teacher. My voice has carried through more classrooms than I can count, guiding teenagers through the wildfire of their own emotions while teaching them the discipline of language. Words matter. Punctuation matters. Precision matters. And I suppose that's why those forged signatures struck me so quickly. Because handwriting, like writing, reveals more than people think. When my husband died, I learned to navigate the world alone. We'd had no children, so I filled my empty evenings with volunteer work, book clubs, and long walks with a thermos of tea. I learned how to fix the leaking sink, how to negotiate with contractors, how to keep my finances in order. I became self-sufficient out of necessity, steady out of habit. Then 2 years ago, the accident happened. A delivery truck ran a red light. Metal folded like paper, and I found myself living through surgeries that felt stitched together by both science and hope. The legal battle afterward was exhausting, but in a strange way, familiar, like grading a stack of essays written in a language I almost remembered. I won. The settlement wasn't extravagant, but it was enough to give me peace of mind. Enough to ensure I wouldn't outlive my savings or my safety. That peace, however, didn't last. Because that's when Daniel re-entered my life. He was my late mother's sister's son, 3 years younger than me, but always somehow the center of family gatherings. Charming, witty, the kind of person who could talk his way into or out of almost anything. Growing up, he had been the one who borrowed money and forgot to return it. The one who, accidentally, kept things that weren't his. But family makes excuses for family, and I learned early on that forgiveness is often expected long before amends are ever offered. Daniel showed up at my house the week the settlement came through. He brought flowers, white lilies, too fragrant, and a warm smile. He said he had experience in financial planning. He said he wanted to help me. He said I deserved to relax after everything I'd endured. I should have trusted my instincts. They had flickered with unease, subtle but persistent, like a weak radio signal trying to warn me. But I was tired. Tired of paperwork, tired of hospital bills, tired of shouldering everything. So I let him help. Now, sitting in the quiet of my living room, staring at the wall where morning light splits into soft gold ribbons, I realize something painful but important. I underestimated him. Or maybe I overestimated the strength of our blood ties. Either way, the truth has entered my life like a cold wind through an open door, and I am left standing in its path. And I haven't even told you the worst part. My family, like many, is a tapestry woven with threads of loyalty and threads of disappointment. We didn't come from wealth or prestige. We came from hand-me-down wisdom and casseroles brought over during hard times. We came from Sunday dinners where everyone spoke at once, stories stacking atop each other like teacups. Daniel was always the golden child in our clan. He had a magnetic presence and a way of telling stories that made even the simplest errand sound like an epic. As kids, he was the one who convinced me to sneak cookies before dinner, then charmed our grandmother into believing he had nothing to do with it. I learned early on that Daniel carried a particular talent, deflecting responsibility with a disarming smile. My mother adored him. She said he had big potential. She believed he would become a lawyer or a businessman, that he would bring pride to the family name. She never saw the unpaid debts, the girlfriends who left abruptly, the jobs he lost without explanation. But I did. Still, love, especially familial love, often places rose-colored glasses over bruises and warning signs. And Daniel knew how to play that instrument better than anyone. After my husband passed, Daniel began visiting more often. He said he wanted to check on me, but the conversations always drifted toward money. How I was managing. Whether I needed help. Whether I had considered investment strategies. I brushed it off as concern, though concern from Daniel often came packaged with self-interest. Then the accident happened. My world shrank to hospital rooms, to dull beeps, to nights spent clutching a blanket against pain so sharp it felt like lightning trapped under my skin. And in that vulnerable space, Daniel's presence took on a different shape, one that felt like comfort. He brought magazines. He brought soup. He told me he would take care of me. I wanted to believe him. The rest of my family is scattered. My brother in Oregon, my cousins across the country. I was alone, and Daniel filled the hollow space left by grief and exhaustion. So when he said he could manage the settlement, I didn't question him. Not loudly, anyway. The small voice inside me raised an objection, but the louder one, the one that had survived trauma and simply craved rest, quieted it. Looking back now, I see how the pieces fit together. How he positioned himself. How he used the familiar language of family duty to slip into a role no one assigned him. Trust, once broken by a stranger, is painful. But trust broken by blood, that is something else entirely. It feels like betrayal wearing your grandmother's perfume. And what made this discovery even heavier was what I heard next, from someone who had no obligation to tell me anything at all. 2 days after the meeting with the bank manager, I received a call from an older woman named Mrs. Calder. She was a notary public, the same one Daniel had used when I signed the initial access forms for the settlement account. Or what I believed were access forms. Her voice was gentle but quivering. Mrs. Fairchild. I need to clarify something. When you came in to sign the authorization documents last spring, did you bring your cousin with you? My breath stalled. No, I said. I never signed authorization documents with him. I signed a single transfer form the day the funds were released. Alone. Silence stretched thin across the line. Oh dear, she whispered. Then I think you should come by my office. When I arrived, she laid out 3 documents on her desk, each notarized with her stamp, each bearing what appeared to be my signature. But the ink was wrong. The slant was wrong. And worst of all, each document granted Daniel full financial management privileges over my settlement. I stared at them as if staring long enough would make them dissolve. I notarized these because the identification looked genuine, she said softly. But now I realize the woman who signed them was not you. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the arms of my chair. Daniel hadn't just stolen from me. He had impersonated me. He had faked forms, forged signatures, and manipulated a notary, one who had served my community for 40 years. The betrayal deepened, widening into a canyon that seemed to stretch back into every memory of him smiling at me, laughing with me, hugging me. I left her office with photocopies, my heart pounding like it was trying to break free from my ribs. At home, I opened my filing cabinet and pulled out every document Daniel had ever helped me with. And there it was, a pattern I had never noticed because trust is a dangerous kind of blindness. Small changes in dates. A misplaced middle initial. Signatures that looked familiar enough in passing but, under scrutiny, revealed a trembling hand trying to mimic mine. The total amount he'd siphoned became clearer. Not just the $83,000 from the bank slips, but nearly $30,000 more through authorized transfers he had forged. Over $100,000. Gone. Stolen by someone who had once braided my hair when we were children. By someone who stood beside me at my husband's funeral. By someone who cried in my hospital room after the accident. Family doesn't always come with knives. Sometimes they come with pens. And as I laid out the documents across my dining table, one more realization struck me like a blow. Daniel didn't do this alone. I contacted an attorney named Marissa Hale, a woman who spoke with the precise sharpness of someone who had no interest in wasting a single word. When I arrived at her office, she greeted me with a firm handshake and eyes that assessed details like a seasoned chess player. I presented everything, the forged documents, the notary's statement, the bank slips, my own records. As she sifted through them, her brows tightened in a slow, deliberate way that told me she was organizing the truth piece by piece. This is extensive, she finally said. This isn't casual theft. It's orchestrated fraud. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, a mixture of humiliation and fury. I trusted him. People like your cousin, she replied, depend on that. She explained the process: subpoenas, fraud reports, account freeze requests, communication with financial institutions. She said she would personally handle the legal pursuit of criminal charges and recovery efforts. Before we proceed, she said, I need to ask, do you want this handled quietly or thoroughly? I met her gaze. Thoroughly. Every inch of it. She nodded with a subtle look of respect. As we built the case, more details surfaced. Daniel had used a second person to impersonate me at the notary's office, a woman in her 40s matching my height and frame. The bank security footage, once reviewed through official channels, confirmed it. A grainy recording showed her signing papers while Daniel stood beside her, blocking her face from the camera whenever possible. He had planned this. He had studied my signature, studied my financial patterns. He had waited until I was weakened by trauma, then wedged himself into the vulnerable cracks left behind. The most damning evidence came from his personal bank records. Through legal request, Marissa obtained transaction histories showing transfers into an account labeled under a shell company he had created only months before my settlement was released. He had built the infrastructure for the theft before he even offered to help. But what both astonished and sickened me was the discovery that followed. Daniel had also taken loans in my name. Marissa placed the loan documents in front of me, each one linked to my stolen identity. He used the money as collateral, she said quietly. He's deeper in debt than you know. Debt. A word that suddenly clarified everything. Daniel had always lived beyond his means, always juggling jobs, always on the edge of financial collapse. He hadn't stolen from me out of opportunity. He had stolen out of desperation. And people who act from desperation often make mistakes. Marissa leaned back in her chair. Mrs. Fairchild, you have enough evidence to dismantle him legally. Completely. But she paused, studying me again. Are you prepared for what that will mean? I thought of my mother, who had always urged forgiveness. I thought of my husband, who believed justice should be measured and calm. I thought of the girl I once was, and the woman I had become through grief, through injury, through quiet resilience. Yes, I said. I am prepared. But I had no idea how far the fallout would reach. The turning point didn't come in a courtroom or an attorney's office. It came in my kitchen, quiet, ordinary, sunlit, where so many moments of my life had unfolded. I was rinsing a teacup when my phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. Hey, Eleanor. Haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay? The casual tone, the feigned concern, the brazenness of it. It crystallized something inside me. Until that moment, part of me still clung to the hope that he might explain himself. That perhaps this was all a misunderstanding. But this message, so breezy and hollow, made the truth undeniable. He thought I was still in the dark. And I realized that if I responded with the fury pulsing through my veins, I would lose control of the narrative. Daniel thrived in chaos. He needed emotional leverage, needed me to lash out so he could twist the story like he always had. No. I would not give him the storm he expected. I would give him silence. Strategic, deliberate silence. I blocked his number. Then I sat down at my table, opened a fresh notebook, and began outlining every step of what Marissa called the quiet containment strategy. Freeze the remaining accounts. File the fraud report with the bank. Notify the settlement administrator. Initiate the criminal complaint. Document everything. Dates, conversations, inconsistencies. Prepare for confrontation only when the evidence was irrefutable and the authorities were ready. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. I was not the woman lying in a hospital bed, waiting for someone else to steer the ship. I was a 62-year-old widow who had survived loss, survived injury, survived betrayal. I would survive this, too. Marissa called later that afternoon. We're ready to proceed, she said. But I want to prepare you. Once this moves forward, the fallout will reach your entire family. I took a long breath. The fallout isn't mine to own. And for the first time since the bank meeting, I felt a clarity that steadied me. Still, when the authorities informed Daniel of the investigation, his reaction was more explosive than I could have imagined. He denied everything. Accused me of losing my memory. Said I was confused, vulnerable, manipulated by outsiders. He even contacted my brother, claiming I was mentally declining. But this time, his performance fell flat. Because when the truth is documented, lies cannot stand upright. A week later, the final piece clicked into place. Surveillance footage from a second notary location where Daniel attempted to create yet another forged authorization. The woman impersonating me was now identifiable. The timestamp correlated with the forged documents. Marissa called me. This is it. The moment of no return. And something inside me, steady, resolute, answered. Then let's go all the way. The day the investigators visited Daniel's home, the sky was a flat, pewter gray. It was fitting, in a poetic way. Betrayal deserves muted colors. Marissa advised me not to be present, and I agreed. This wasn't a spectacle. It was procedure. But that evening, she called to brief me on everything that had unfolded. Your cousin attempted to talk his way out of it, she said. It didn't work. The investigators had presented the documents, the forged signatures, the impersonation footage, the shell company records, the loan applications. They laid everything out in chronological order, a timeline of deceit structured with the precision of a legal symphony. At first, he denied it. Then he blamed me. Then he claimed addiction. Then he said he had planned to return the money. And finally, in the longest pause of his life, he said nothing at all. Because there comes a moment in every unraveling when even the person pulling the threads can't pretend the fabric is still whole. The silent downfall had begun. Within a week, Daniel's accounts were frozen. His debts, exposed. His accomplice, the woman who impersonated me, was identified and questioned. She turned on him quickly, presenting messages and instructions he had given her. Every lie he had woven began to fray under the weight of evidence. Extended family members started calling, whispering their shock, their disbelief, their embarrassment. Some apologized. Some stayed quiet out of dread. A few, those who always admired him too blindly, asked whether I really intended to ruin his life. But here is the truth I held on to. I wasn't ruining anything. I was revealing what was already there. Daniel had created the downfall with his own hands. I simply opened the curtain. When he finally reached out through an intermediary, begging for a private conversation, pleading for mercy, I declined. Not out of cruelty but clarity. Mercy without accountability enables harm. And I had no interest in perpetuating the cycle. Marissa summarized the legal trajectory: restitution, fraud charges, identity theft charges, potential prison time depending on his cooperation. But the consequence that struck deepest wasn't in the courtroom. It happened quietly, in the community Daniel had charmed for most of his life. His employer let him go. His landlord issued a notice. Friends who once laughed at his tall tales now questioned every word he'd ever spoken. Fraud may begin with ink, but it ends with silence. Silence from the people who no longer trust you. Silence from the world that once welcomed you. Silence from the family who finally sees you clearly. I didn't celebrate his downfall. I didn't gloat. I didn't revel. I simply breathed. For the first time in months, the air felt clean. When the legal dust began to settle, I found myself returning to habits that grounded me. Morning tea, evening walks, the soft rustle of book pages turning under my fingers. My life, once clouded by betrayal, slowly regained its shape. The recovery of funds would take time, Marissa warned. The legal system moves with deliberate slowness, ensuring every detail is accounted for. But I didn't feel the panic I once would have felt. I had survived the worst, not the financial loss, but the emotional rupture. The most surprising part of the aftermath wasn't the legal resolution. It was how my understanding of family shifted. My brother flew in to visit me, bringing with him an apology wrapped in genuine sorrow. I should have checked in more, he said. I should have known he was capable of this. But that wasn't his burden to bear. Daniel's choices belonged to Daniel. We talked long into the night, the way siblings do when life has reminded them that time is not guaranteed. We laughed, too, a rare sound in the wake of betrayal. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in small mercies. I also received a letter from Daniel. Handwritten. 6 pages long. I read it once. Then set it aside. It was filled with excuses and pleas for forgiveness. But apologies without restitution are not apologies. They are strategies. And strategies have no place in healing. Still, I wished no harm upon him. Age has a way of tempering justice with compassion. I simply wished for him to face the consequences of what he had done, and to emerge better, if he chose to learn. Weeks turned into months. My strength returned. My routines rebalanced. I even started teaching part-time again at a community center. Literature classes for adults who wanted to rediscover the joy of reading. Their enthusiasm reminded me that life is richer when shared with people who show up with sincerity, not ulterior motives. One evening after class, a student said to me, "You have a very calming presence." I smiled, grateful. I had not felt calm in a long time, but her words landed gently. Healing is not about forgetting. It is about reclaiming space that pain once occupied. I reclaimed mine with care, patience, and dignity. And though the legal case would continue to move forward, I no longer felt consumed by it. Justice was in motion, steady and unstoppable, like a tide guided by the gravity of truth. What surprised me most was how peaceful justice felt. It wasn't fiery or vengeful. It was quiet, methodical. I had always believed revenge belonged in the realm of anger, but I learned that ethical retaliation, standing firm in truth, can be as calm as a well-written sentence. I found closure not in Daniel's downfall, but in my own restoration. At 62, I have learned that life offers its wisdom slowly, like a careful teacher. And betrayal, especially when delivered by the hands of family, delivers lessons with a painful clarity. If there is a moral to my story, it is this: never confuse familiarity with trust. Never confuse blood with integrity. And never underestimate the quiet strength you carry, even when you think it's dormant. Revenge, as people often imagine it, is loud and volatile. But ethical revenge, the kind rooted in truth, documentation, and calm confrontation, is something altogether different. It does not scorch the earth. It does not scream or thrash. It stands firm. It exposes. It lets consequences speak for themselves. When someone steals from you, they assume you will break. But sometimes, the very act of betrayal becomes the catalyst that shapes you into someone stronger, clearer, more resolute. I share my story so others might recognize the quiet red flags in their own lives. The moments when unease whispers instead of shouts. The times when someone's charm tries to outrun their accountability. Listen to those moments. And remember this: you do not need to meet wrongdoing with rage. You can meet it with order, with clarity, with documentation, with steady steps toward justice. My cousin underestimated me. He mistook my gentleness for fragility, my kindness for naivety. He thought my age made me vulnerable, that my grief made me pliable. He forgot that I was a teacher, a widow, a survivor, a woman who had rebuilt her life more than once. And now, I stand in a place of peace, not because everything is perfect, but because everything is honest. If you are listening to this story, perhaps you too have been wronged by someone you trusted. Perhaps you are holding the weight of a betrayal that has left your heart bruised. I hope my journey reminds you that you are capable of reclaiming your narrative. Justice does not need to roar. Sometimes, it simply arrives with a stack of documents, a calm voice, and the undeniable truth. And as I close this chapter of my life, I offer this final thought. When faced with deception, choose integrity. When confronted with betrayal, choose evidence. And when the world underestimates you, choose to show them who you truly are, and who you have always been.